going to start our survey of Latin literature with probably the most interesting poet of them all, Martial. He's Spanish. He was born in AD 40 in the town Bilbilis in the mountains of Spain, near where Madrid is today. At this time, Spain was more than 100 years Romanized and without serious rebellion, and Rome starts to see more and more influential people coming from Spain. The first Spanish emperor, Trajan, will rise to power only a few years after Domitian's death in 96, and another Spaniard, Seneca, was Nero's most trusted and closest advisor around AD 60. So it's not surprising to see this Spaniard, Martial, rise to fame. Martial presumably went to Rome in 60 with the support of Seneca, but Seneca, that famous Stoic, fell out of favor with Nero in 65 and was forced to commit suicide, leaving Martial without support. So what's a poor poet to do? Write complimentary and flattering verses of very rich people. And so began Martial's career as an epigrammist. He wrote for quite a time these epigrams, giving private recitations of them, and he made a name for himself. Eventually, he collected his epigrams into books and published them. The introduction to his first book of poetry reads, Hic est quem leges illa quem requiris, toto notus in orba Martialis, argutis epigrammaton libellis, qui lector studiose quodadisti, viventi decus atque sentienti, rari post cineres habent poetae. You read him, you ask for him, and here he is, Martial, known the world over for his witty little books of epigrams. Devoted reader, the glory you have given him while he lives and feels comes to few poets in their graves. An epigram, as we'll find out by reading Martial's poems, is a short bit of poem, very famous in Rome at this time, and usually about lighthearted themes like love and wine. Some Roman predecessors of Martial had worked it into a new pattern, a joke with a surprise at the end. Martial would continue this sort of practice. Catullus, more than 100 years before Martial, had also used the epigram in some of his paradoxical love poems. But Martial, while he might have admired Catullus, didn't model himself after him. Catullus, as we'll find out, was very personal in his poetry and wrote about his own love poems. Martial tends to write about other people and their problems. Catullus uses paradox and antithesis to draw a sharp contrast in his feelings and emotions. Martial uses paradox and antithesis to draw out a laugh or to carry forth the insult even more. Catullus uses exaggeration as a way to express his emotions. Martial uses exaggeration as a way of pointing out the ludicrous. Martial's biggest theme is pointing out the typical people in Roman society and exposing their hypocrisies and stupidity, instead of working with mythological themes like the serious poets. Here's one of Martial's more tame poems. Hostem cum fugaret se fagnis ipse peremit, hic rogo non fororest, ne moriari mori. When he was fleeing the enemy, Fannius killed himself. Is this, I ask, not crazy? Dying to avoid death? Think of these poems kind of like you would a joke. The first line sets up the situation, while the second line delivers a punchline, building it up throughout the line until the very end slams it home, often completely reversing expectations altogether. Here we have the last line beginning with hic, this, and then the parenthetical rogo, I ask, continuing with non foro est, is not crazy. And in the recitation of the poem, there would be a pause here, setting up the observed paradox, ne moriari, so that you don't die, mori, dying. Martial rose to fame in the reign of Domitian, and as we've seen, it was important to curry favor with him so Martial would continue to find work and not be exiled or worse. Martial's first published work was a set of epigrams celebrating the opening of the Colosseum in Titus's, Domitian's brother's, reign in AD 80. A year later, with Titus dead and Domitian in power, Martial continued to flatter the Flavian dynasty. Here's a selection from a poem of flattery of Domitian. Si qua fides veris praeferi maxime Caesar, temporibus possunt saecula nulla tuis, quando magis dignos liquit spectare triumphos, quando palatini plus meruere Dei, pulcrioret maior quo subduce Martia Roma, sub quo libertas principe tanta fuit. If truth be believed, great Caesar, no generation can be thought superior to your times, when men could watch triumphs better earned. When did the gods of the Palatine deserve more? Under what leader was Mars's Rome more beautiful and great? Under what prince did liberty so flourish? Was this propaganda, or did Martial merely realize that he only flourished as a poet under Domitian's good grace? Quid pro quo. Domitian allows Martial to keep writing his epigrams, potentially even supporting him, and Martial writes flattering poems about Domitian. But when Domitian was killed in 96, the new administration, especially that of the soldier Trajan in 98, didn't look fondly on Martial, and he chose to retreat back to his home in Spain, leaving metropolitan Rome, the muse of his epigrams, behind. When Martial died, Pliny wrote to a friend, "I have just heard of the death of poor Martial, which much concerns me. He was a man of an acute and lively genius, and his writings abound in both wit and satire, combined with equal candor. When he left Rome, I complimented him with a present to defray the charges of his journey, not only as a testimony of my friendship, but in return for the little poem he had written about me. Do you not think that the poet who wrote in such terms of me deserved some friendly marks of my bounty then, and that he deserves my sorrow now? For he gave me the most he could, and it was want of power only if his present was not more valuable. But to say truth, what higher can be conferred on a man than fame, and applause, and immortality? And though it should be granted that his poems will not be immortal, still, no doubt, he composed them supposing otherwise." Pliny would be surprised to find out that he was wrong, and that Martial's poems are immortal in some way or another.